Alexi's own grief remained locked up tight in an airless box where it stayed, except for bleak midnight hours about once a month when he could no longer hold it inside. Those nights he ran in wolf form, howling up at the cold moon in pure fury and ignoring the wolf song that responded to his. His grief was primal, angry and aggressive and stubbornly determined to be a private thing. His packmates didn't know the meaning of private most of the time, but in this, everyone except the toughest, most stubborn wolves held back, likely because Alexei would growl them right back inside the den. His grief had claws. The grief he could sense today, it was raw, without shields, naked and defenseless. It was a wounded animal with its paw caught in a cruel trap, a broken creature in a place without light, alone and afraid. A sentient being who had lost all hope. Both parts of him strained at the leash to find the grieving one, attempt to assuage their grief. He was a dominant predatory changeling, a deep protectiveness toward weaker packmates built into his blood. This person wasn't pack, wasn't wolf, but his instincts didn't make the distinction when so close to such terrible anguish. Alexei had to force himself to pause, think. Such an overwhelming emotional storm, the roar of it thunder in his blood. It could come from only one type of being, an empath. And not just any empath, a powerful empath who was broadcasting on all bands with no thought to who their pain might hit. Alexei had only ever met two empaths. The one he knew best had laughed during their meeting, and he'd felt the ripple of her happiness in the air, but it had been akin to catching a distant scent on the wind. This was a deluge, but there was no attempt to confuse his own senses. The E was broadcasting so loudly that he couldn't help but feel their crushing grief, his already battered and bruised heart aching, but he knew the grief wasn't his own. The E wasn't targeting him or making any attempt to hack his mind. The waves of emotion were too uncontrolled and chaotic for that. As a wolf might react to the loss of his mate, throwing back his head and howling his rage and grief up at the sky, uncaring of who else might hear. This was no Psy trick or trap. Alexei ran in the direction of the torrent of pain. Only moments earlier, and regardless of his wolf's edgy need to run, he'd been considering turning back. The sudden rise in the strength of the wind worried him, and the rain had become a pitiless silver sheet that threatened to turn into shards of ice. Though heavy snow yet shrouded the higher elevations, including thick patches in his current location, it had been cloudy but otherwise fine when he left his pack's central den in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, turning back was not an option. The fallen pine needles and snowy leaf litter were fleeting touches under his booted feet, the water that ran over him frigid. Tall green firs, thickly dusted with white, speared into the granite-colored sky at the start of his run toward the E, but 5 minutes of loping over the landscape with wolfish speed, and the forest giants began to feather out in favor of smaller trees. Those too disappeared not long afterward. It could be bitingly cold at this elevation, even in the summer months, the mountains less than hospitable to large foliage. But they'd had an unseasonal warm snap over the past 2 weeks. Grass had begun to poke its sharp blades through the snow, and in between the huge shattered rocks that thrust out of the mountain, he spotted tiny, rain-bedraggled wildflowers that would raise their hopeful faces to the sun after the storm was past. The wind slapped at his skin, and the icy rain ran down his back, but he didn't slow, driven to find the empath suffering so terribly that she was threatening to crush his heart. She. Yes, the taste of the presence he could sense was categorically female. It was as if she were broadcasting part of herself with her pain, as if the slamming waves of emotion held a scent his wolf could catch. His heart thundered, his lungs expanding and collapsing in a harsh rhythm. Inside him ran the wolf that was his other half, a half without which he could never be whole. Alexei and his wolf, they were one, even when it came to the curse that haunted his family and had taken his brother. Primal wolf and changeling heart, Alexei accepted who he was, and the price it demanded. He ran on, the hunt in his blood. His packmates didn't often wander this way. The power substation he'd promised to look in on during this run was a half-hour to the west and could be approached from multiple other directions. It was possible no one had spent time up here for months.